here are not surprised. The census reveals a staggering 116,500 Australians are now classed as homeless, an increase of almost 14% over 5 years. Close to 25,000 of them in Victoria, up 11%. Nothing will change until we all realise it could happen to any one of us.
Like, I'm sympathetic to them. Like, obviously it's quite sad that they're in that situation, that you know, that they can't find a place to live. So yeah, I'm sympathetic.
When I think of homeless people, I think that I see them on the streets and I often want to give to them, but I often find that there's this stereotype that they're going to go buy drugs and alcohol, and you find yourself like resistant to give money to that because you don't understand their situation, and so you're kind of a bit embarrassed to interact with them. So yeah.
Sadness. A person who is not at all well off and who appears not to be well provided for in his clothing or her clothing, and who is in the streets of Sydney, and it might be in the evening or the early morning when that person hasn't had anywhere to sleep or any shelter, and it might be winter, so they might be hungry, and they might feel very alone.
Honestly, the first thing that popped into my head is like just desperation. Yeah, I just kind of really feel for those people. Like, yeah, I wouldn't be able to put myself in their shoes, but you know, when you see somebody, I have that kind of genuine feeling. Like, I always feel guilty about not giving them a couple of dollars, but I don't every time because you can't. You know, there's so many homeless people. Yeah, so that's the first thing, is just like the word desperation. Like, they must be in such a desperate situation. You know, just passing the time every day would be hard. You know. Yeah.
Pada pendapat saya, orang gelandangan akan kekal gelandangan apabila mereka malas dan tidak mahu untuk ambil peluang yang ada, yang telah diberikan oleh kerajaan dan masyarakat kita.
I think there's a range of issues, but if they're trying to get out of homelessness, I would say a lack of education or access to education or access to jobs and the basic things we need in terms of showers, presentations, internet, phones, even just getting an interview, let alone getting a job.
Okay, so One Meal started with my husband Paul. He came to me one day and said he wanted to give back to the less fortunate. He had been homeless himself from the age of 15 to 19, and we went into the city not knowing what to expect or how many we were going to get. We'd spoken to City Council and they gave us a location to go to. After we finished, I think we fed about 25 patrons, and after we finished we decided we couldn't do this just the once, and having somebody say to you that this is the best food they've had in a long time, and you go, but it's free food, like, and it's just food that you would cook in your own home for your own family and friends, is quite eye-opening. And it's like, wow, to me that's just a simple meal that I enjoy all the time. To have somebody tell you that it's the best meal they've had in a long time is very heartbreaking. So we decided then to form One Meal, and we registered and became a charity, and it's just gone from there, stronger and stronger. A lot of people believe that homelessness is because of alcohol and drugs and things like that, and you'll find when you are involved with the patrons and you talk to them often enough, a lot of them have come from families and relationships that have separated, or they've lost their jobs, or you know, they've lived in a sheltered life with their families, and you know, parents have passed away and they've not known how to survive and things like that. The drugs and that, yeah, sure, they're involved, but most of the time you'll find that the parents will, the people that actually get on the drugs occur more commonly after they're on the street, and that's a coping mechanism. That they're not all bad. I mean, I talk to them all the time, and all they really want is to somebody sit down and listen to them. You know, when you've got no one to talk to over daytime, you know, to have that one-on-one contact with somebody, and just for them to sit down and tell you their wonderful story, whether it's fact or not, just to listen to them and to treat them with the same respect that you would treat anybody else.
Lou's Place is almost 20 years old. Next year we're having our 20th birthday, and basically we're set up as a day refuge to ensure that women have a safe place to go during the day, and everything that we try to do at Lou's Place we put through a healing lens. How can we have healing for the women that we're supporting through a plate of food? How can we have healing for women in how they're greeted at our door? In every aspect of our service, we're putting everything through a healing lens. And we are very privileged to work with about 100 volunteers on rotation across a typical month. Those volunteers come in and provide activities for us in the morning and the afternoon. So there is yoga, a meditation, and an art class, and a sewing class, and jewellery, music. And we think of all of those activities as offering opportunities for healing for the women that we're working with. I think homelessness for women can, you know, look a little bit differently at times. So we do think of people who are homeless as people who are couch surfing, as people who are sleeping in cars, not only as people who are sleeping on the street. I would include people who are in temporary accommodation or a woman's refuge, or stuck living in a backpackers, for example, all as homeless because there is no housing security. Number one reason why women are homeless is because of domestic violence.
Right, okay.
So you don't need to be using drugs or alcohol or have a mental illness to experience domestic violence.
Yeah.
So that's a really important myth, I think, that we need to break down in our community.
Okay.
So what I often say to people is, when we're talking about homelessness, the sophisticated thinkers amongst us are often talking about domestic violence, but what I think we need to also be talking about is drug and alcohol addiction, mental illness, and really, if we want to stop some of these problems emerging, we need to talk about childhood abuse, childhood sexual abuse, because if we have fewer people in our community, fewer women in our community having an experience of abuse or sexual abuse as children, then we will have fewer homeless women down the track. So there need to be more services in place to deal with childhood abuse and neglect. New South Wales government is needing to do more.
Okay.
And I think if we don't raise the level of support that we are and funding that we're putting into these services, and build more sustainable and affordable housing in our city, we are going to be a city where there is a bigger gap between people who have and people who don't. You know, there's a loss of that kind of middle section in our community, and there certainly needs to be more affordable housing.
Certainly we assist women who've experienced domestic violence, who, because of things that the perpetrator did, for instance not pay rent or damage the property in the course of a domestic violence incident, they may leave a tenancy owing a lot of money to the landlord, not because of anything they've done, but because of things that the perpetrator did. And in some circumstances they can be listed on tenancy databases, so like a bad tenant database. And if that happens, their prospect of getting another rental is pretty much zero. the waiting list for housing in New South Wales, 60,000 applicants, probably over 100,000 individuals. Unless you can convince the Department of Housing your situation is very urgent, you could wait between 10 and 20 years to be offered a property.
What, 10 to 20 years?
Yeah.